Glenn Judson, I'm the program leader of nutrition and farm systems with a group called Agricom, and we're a breeding and marketing company for temperate forage grasses and forages in New Zealand and Australia.
With your talk today, as in you're focusing on getting your better performance out of your pastures.
Yep.
So what sort of main issues do you think producers could do better to actually improve that performance in pastures?
Yeah, really good question. I think there's two aspects to this. One is actually getting the right pastures for the environment. So in some perspective, what we need to do is actually have a think outside the square and make sure that we're using the right pasture species in the right locations. So there are many locations, particularly throughout Australia, where perennial ryegrass is just outside its comfort zone. And we need to be thinking about other pasture species that may fit in there. So I would expect in an Australian environment that there are a number of different species that could be used, and the whole idea here is to try and increase the amount of dry matter that you're producing annually. The other very important part of that is that we need to also be in a situation in terms of grazing that we utilise as much of what we grow as possible. So that comes down to grazing management, and I think across Australia there is a huge opportunity in terms of intensifying grazing, particularly in the beef industry, using one wire to subdivide. And what you tend to do is, even though you might not grow a blade more grass, you actually have the ability to utilise more of what you grow.
So you talk about pasture mix.
Yep.
What's wrong with having a very strong ryegrass stand with, say, clover?
Oh, listen, there's no problem at all, as long as you are in a ryegrass environment. And I think sometimes what we do is we try and push ryegrass because it is really easily managed. It's a fantastic forage. Sometimes we try and push that into environments which aren't ryegrass friendly, and then we end up having pastures that may be only lasting 18 months when there are some other pasture species out there, things like tall fescues and cocksfoots, that require some different management but are much more at home in some of the environments that I see. So for example, as soon as we get environmental temperatures over about 23 or 24 degrees, ryegrass actually starts slowing down its growth because it feels hot. Tall fescue is much more comfortable into the early 30s before it does that. So understanding the physiology of those plants actually allows you to actually match plants with their environments. Cocksfoot's another one. Why do we get cocksfoot reinvading into pastures? Because it feels at home. And I think some of the benefits of actually using some of our modern cocksfoots under good grazing management may be exactly where we should be, rather than lingering with ryegrasses in environments that aren't ryegrass environments. If they are ryegrass environments, I think ryegrass and clovers are exactly the right thing to use.
Now, you talk about grazing management as the second part of the strategy to try and improve performance. What are we doing wrong there, and why do we need to electrify and go down to small paddocks?
Yeah, I think you've got large areas at the moment, and what I'm not saying is that we need to turn ourselves into very intensive grazing systems, but it's quite clear that for low-hanging fruit, that for cutting paddocks in half or getting yourself into a rotation, that there are some quite big improvements that can be made very easily. So in a lot of our research work, the difference between set stocking paddocks for a long time and setting up even just a basic rotation, which may be that you're rotating through paddocks maybe weekly, differences in terms of meat production at the end of it can be in the order of 10 to 15% extra simply by setting up a rotation. And I think that's low-hanging fruit that's available to producers. They need to make the conscious decision that they're not prepared to take that 10%, and I think that was the key message today, is just realise that there's that type of increase available if you're prepared to subdivide. In some cases you can't, but I think people need to be aware that that's the type of changes just in terms of productivity you can get by simply going down, even setting up such a basic rotation.
but on the other side there are costs associated with that, both with the wire but also the labour costs. So
yep, and I think they go hand in hand with maybe some pasture improvement, so that some of our better species respond better to that. So yeah, I agree. There's some additional costs, and I don't think it's actually the wire, because to me that's relatively inexpensive. What I would say is the water points are probably in a beef industry, or in a beef system, are far more problematic. So yes, it's not for everybody, and I'm not saying that everybody should rush out and do it, but I think it's an opportunity that needs to be identified to people who would find that relatively easy to do. I think there's some low-hanging fruit there that we can take advantage of.
Glenn Judson, thanks for talking with us today.
No problems, thank you.